Today, we're going to be learning about type 1 diabetes, more specifically, being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a teenager, which is fairly common, surprisingly. So, today we're just going to be talking about just a general overview, like what you should, what you shouldn't do, what you should probably get, what you need, what you don't need. So, let's get started. First off, we're going to talk about what type 1 diabetes is. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder where your body attacks the pancreas cells. Basically, a normal person's body is supposed to absorb glucose from food, which travels into the bloodstream. And the blood basically tells the pancreas, yo, we need insulin. And the pancreas produces insulin. And so the insulin tells the cells, let in this glucose so we can break it down for energy. And the cells let in the glucose, and boom, you break it down for energy, and your blood sugar goes down. With someone with type 1 diabetes, they don't have any insulin, so they have no form of communication to the cells to say, let this glucose in. So basically, the glucose is just floating around the body. It doesn't have anywhere to go, which is why blood sugars go so high whenever you have type 1 diabetes. And that's why hemoglobin, A1C, that kind of stuff goes really high, is because it's trying to counteract that, but there's no insulin to let it into the cell. Symptoms of type 1 diabetes are pretty easy to spot. They include excessive thirst, increased need to urinate, cravings for sugar, fatigue, vision blurring, and unintended weight loss, and fast heart rate. And all of these are caused by high blood sugar, hypoglycemia, basically everything that type 1 diabetes does to your body causes all of these symptoms. So obviously this means that the normal blood sugar rate for non-diabetics and diabetics are completely different. Non-diabetics usually have a way lower blood sugar level than a diabetic does, and that's just how the body works. Usually for non-diabetics, they run around 80 to 140 after they've eaten, and 80 to 199 milligrams per deciliter when they wake up in the morning or whenever they go to sleep. For a diabetic, whenever they wake up and before they eat, it's usually 80 to 130 milligrams per deciliter, and after they eat, it's usually 80 to 180, which is a huge difference. 100 milligrams per deciliter to be exact. You're probably thinking, so when am I supposed to monitor my blood sugar? The recommended times that usually a doctor will tell you is right when you wake up, before you eat a meal, after you eat a meal, and right before you go to bed. Usually a doctor will vary on 1 to 3 hours after eating, depends on how severe your diabetes is. So there's a lot of monitoring devices that are sold at CVS and Walgreens. Some of them measure your A1C level, which is something that we're not going to talk about in this video, and some measure your blood glucose levels, which is more common. Basically, a monitoring device will prick your finger, and it will take a little drop of your blood, analyze it, and see how high or low your blood sugar level is. And it will tell you this to determine whether or not you need to take an insulin shot, whether or not your blood sugar is in the toast and you need to eat something, or if you're fine. Usually you should journal it down just in case, because if your blood sugar is super high for a couple days or it's super low for a couple days, that's when you really need to talk to a doctor. on actually the subject, according to my research, which is totally thorough, there's a couple of blood monitoring systems that actually are pretty good. So there's 3 that I looked at and thought were really good ideas. So there's the CareTouch blood glucose monitoring system, which is the simplest and most affordable one that I've found. So if you don't want to get this giant fancy one that's let me read it to the 0.0 milligram per deciliter, and you're just kind of wanting a generalization, trying to figure out how to use it, and it's kind of your first one, a beta test, that's probably the best one to go with. The Prodigy diabetes monitoring system, it's really cool. It gives you your blood glucose levels in different languages. So obviously, if English isn't your first language and you speak something completely different than English at home, There's 4 options that it has. I really don't know what the 4 options is, so I'm sorry. But it gives you your blood glucose levels in different languages if that's what you're looking for. The Accu-Chek's Aviva Plus has been found to be the most accurate. So if you want to know your blood glucose level to a T, that's the one you should be looking at. And there's a lot of them on the market. Some of them range from like $20 to like maybe even $100 if you want that really extra cool one. But just find the one that works for you. You're probably wondering by now, Seth, you keep talking about blood glucose levels, but what should I do when mine is too high or too low? In simplest terms, what you should do when your blood glucose level is too high is obviously take an insulin shot. And if you don't have insulin on you, which is probably the worst idea you could have had, the best thing to do is to drink water. Because what glucose does is it takes water out of your blood and it dehydrates you super quickly, which is why whenever your blood sugar is super high, you get super thirsty. Whenever your blood sugar is too low, what you should do is eat hard candy, drink soda, get something sugary in your system. Even if it's just something small, not like drink a whole like giant liter bottle of like Coke or eat a whole Kit Kat bar. Just something small, something enough to like boost it back up. The biggest part of your diabetes life is going to end up being your food choices. So basically, you can't eat sugar. That's kind of a given. Like, you got diabetes, you have to avoid sugary foods. So in a very condensed version, some foods that you should avoid are foods that have refined carbs, high added sugars, high saturated fats. That just goes for anyone. Don't go for saturated fats. High cholesterol, because your cholesterol gets really high when you got diabetes. Just avoid unhealthy foods, and especially avoid refined carbs and added sugars. Those are your 2 worst enemies. So some examples of foods that are really bad are like pizza, like big old pasta dinners. I don't know, apparently rice is bad, which sucks because, like, I love rice. I could never live without it. But on a good hand, some good foods to eat are ones that are high in potassium, high in iron, high in whole grains. Whole grains are going to be your best friends. High in unsaturated fats, proteins. Like, chicken breast is a good idea for a good meal. Like, a cooked chicken breast, not like a deep fried chicken breast, but a cooked chicken breast. Like, a meal that I had today that was really good and diabetes healthy was a chicken breast with a side of asparagus. That is a good, healthy choice to have. Don't go for pizza. And there is actually some diabetes-friendly pizzas out there. And never had them in my life, but I'm really going to want to try those because I think that sounds delicious. There are many websites dedicated to diabetic-friendly foods out there. You can plan meals, you can keep like a little calorie count, like figure out what kind of food you're going to eat, what's in your foods, what's healthy to eat, what's not healthy to eat. There's a lot of websites that are dedicated to this. So if this video is not helping in the way that you're looking for it, just look up a website that's like healthy food for diabetics. I looked that up and I got like 7 billion options. And a lot of them are actually really good. Like everyone's like, asparagus is nasty, broccoli's nasty, I don't want to eat vegetables. Like, find something that works for you. If you don't want to eat a like butt ton of celery, then find something that works for you, like chicken, fish, cooked beef, that kind of stuff. Not like McDonald's chicken nuggets. That's not a healthy food option. The biggest thing with diabetes is high blood sugar. And you're probably wondering, so what's so bad about high blood sugar? Like, you just get a little hyper. Actually, no. When it comes to high blood sugar, you can get hyperglycemia, which causes a lot of risks for things. Increased risk of heart disease, blood clots. If you have a blood sugar above 400, it's a risk for a diabetic coma, which is not good because then you're literally comatose because your blood is syrup. That's a lovely description. The biggest problem for type 1 diabetics is ketone acidosis, which is a big fancy word for a really weird, complicated problem. So ketone acidosis is caused by ketones, which are used to break down fat. Since your body can't use glucose as an energy source, it uses lipids. So when it uses lipids, it releases ketones into your bloodstream. So basically there's ketones in your blood. And if you have a super high amount of glucose, your body thinks, oh, ketones work for fats, so it's probably going to work for glucose. It just releases a butt ton of them. And obviously that's not good, because what ketones do is they produce acid. So if you have too much of that, your blood is basically going to be acidic, which is not good. So if you have like really high blood sugar, you should check your urine for ketones, which is something that your doctor will probably tell you to look for. And there's some very specific ways to check that. I don't really know how to check that very well without going to really convoluted things, but make sure you look out for ketone acidosis, because that is probably the worst problem that you could have as a type 1 diabetic. Aside from ketone acidosis, other problems that can occur with high blood sugar are nerve damage, vision problems, skin diseases, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of blood clots, increased risk of high cholesterol, which causes a whole other slew of health diseases, liver problems, kidney failure, like bladder issues. There's just a whole lot of things. A lot of people with diabetes will have to get their feet amputated sometimes because it causes blood problems, which it cuts off circulation to your feet or your hands, but it's mostly your feet. And then you have foot problems, and then they have to amputate because something went horribly wrong. So it's a really good idea to make sure that your blood sugar is at a normal range. Now to my favorite part, exercise. No one really truly loves to exercise. No one wants to get sweaty. No one wants to be sore. But when it comes to diabetics, exercise is really important. The biggest thing that it does is lower your blood sugar, lowers your blood pressure, lowers your bad cholesterol and triglyceride levels. But what it can do is it can promote weight loss, which for someone with diabetes, that's obviously a problem, is sometimes you gain weight and it's really hard to lose it because you don't have anything that's breaking down the extra oomph, as I call it. But the best time to exercise is usually like 3 hours after you eat. You don't want to go before, because that can cause hypoglycemia, and you don't want to go like straight after, because no one wants to exercise straight after eating. That's a bad idea. The best kinds of exercise for diabetics are walking, running, swimming, biking, hiking, basically just exercise. It's also encouraged that you do strength training, you do flexibility training, because usually when it comes to diabetes, you're usually like fatigued or you feel kind of like lethargic. So whenever you get strength training, you get that extra muscle. And with flexibility, it just goes to say that everyone probably needs more flexibility this day and age. Also, whenever you're exercising, it's usually preferred that you exercise 30 minutes for at least 5 days out of the week. That's just how the national whatever fitness people say. It's a government thing. They say it's a good idea to do it. But even doctors recommend it. Even doctors are like, yo, you should probably exercise. But it's more recommended for diabetics that they do just a little more, just to make sure that like you get a good balance. You don't just like skip 2 days and all of a sudden 2 days your blood sugar just like whoop goes up. So if you're gonna miss 2 days, spread them out. Don't just put them right next to each other. Like don't put Saturday and Sunday right next to each other. Bad idea. Obviously, there's going to be many doctors you're going to need to see whenever you have type 1 diabetes. The most important three are a nutritionist, an endocrinologist, and an ophthalmologist. Let's start with a nutritionist. A nutritionist is going to become your best friend for the rest of your life, basically. When it comes to type 1 diabetes, you have to have certain plans for meals, certain foods you can eat, and all this is determined by a nutritionist. Or if you want to be cool, you can do it yourself, but that's probably not a good idea, because these people are trained professionals that know what's in your food and how to help you with your type 1 diabetes. And there's even some nutritionists that are specialized with diabetics, so they really know what they're talking about. Basically, what a nutritionist does is they help set up food plans and like food goals, and like they educate you on what foods are bad and what foods are good. And especially with type 1 diabetes, that is a very, very good thing to have. The second person you're probably gonna have to see is an endocrinologist. These people will also be your best friend because they're the people who work with your insulin. Insulin's a hormone, and endocrinologists work with hormones, which that's a given. Basically, these people manage your insulin and make sure that's working correctly, and they'll make sure that none of your other hormones are affected by your type 1 diabetes, and they'll make sure that everything's in working order. And if you're on an insulin pump, they make sure that thing's doing its job. If you're taking injectable insulin, they'll also make sure it's doing its job. They're the ones that just solely focus on your insulin and hormone levels. The third person you're probably going to have to see is an ophthalmologist. Now, a lot of people don't really think of that. Whenever they think diabetes, they think, oh, food. They don't think about your vision. When it comes to diabetes, you have an increased risk of vision problems. And for people with 20/20 vision who have already been blessed with good vision, that sounds like a nightmare. But for me and a lot of other people who have contacts or glasses, it's like, oh, okay, normal. Basically, what an ophthalmologist does is they make sure that your vision is in working order. And if it's not, they give you a prescription for glasses, a prescription for contacts, whichever one you want. But when it comes to type 1 diabetes, if your blood sugar's really high, as I mentioned before, it causes vision problems because it increases the pressure in your eyeball, which can cause this disease called glaucoma, and that's a whole nother story. But they make sure that your diabetes and your vision don't intercede, because that would be very bad. In really severe cases, it causes like total blindness. But if you manage your diabetes and you see an ophthalmologist, that will most likely never happen to you. So that's the end of the video, and that's basically all the general information you're going to need to know about type 1 diabetes. And if you do have type 1 diabetes, probably shouldn't be listening to a video on the internet. You should probably go see a doctor. Or if you have seen a doctor, talk to someone who's professional and qualified. Don't take this video from a 16-year-old weirdo who's doing this for a biomed class. But that's just some general information, and that's it. Peace out, guys.